Okay, everybody, we're going to continue our study of the Gilded Age, this era of industrialization. We'll look at the labor movement, the last big part we study before our assessment next week. So take a look at what jobs were like back then, especially factory jobs. So far, we focused a lot on the big guys, kind of the millionaires of the time period. What about the guys who weren't millionaires? So let's take a look at what kind of hours you had to work. A lot of times these factories worked multiple shifts. Usually you work longer than 12 hour, either 12-hour day or longer. So you run a first shift 12 hours, second shift 12 hours. Yeah, think about it, 12 hours a day plus your time to and from work, the hard work you do, not a lot of time for your family, not a lot of time for other stuff going on. And it's one of the big complaints for that people should have a shorter day. Now the downside is that, you know, if you want a shorter day, you get paid less. But still, having a shorter day would take less time and toll on the body, more time for your family. So one of the goals of people that work at this time was to get a shorter day. Usually, companies would find somebody who would be willing to work a long day. A bad job was better than no job, even though it meant less time home with your family because you're working such long days. Conditions at jobs were terrible. We're talking okay, very, very poor condition. One of the biggest things here is that machinery meant not a lot of training was needed anymore. Think about it. It's really easy to do simple jobs. It's called unskilled labor. Certain jobs are very, very skilled. You need special training, special work, special experience to make it happen. A lot of the new machines made labor now unskilled. That means anybody could do those jobs. Could be immigrants, could be children, could be whoever. And basically, companies would find people who would work next to nothing. Anybody they could teach to do these jobs. The work was always hot. It was dirty. It was low pay. We're talking in some cases piecework, like you get paid by how much you did. Sometimes you're given an amount of work and said, do this, no matter how long it takes. Sometimes it was just, a very simple 7 cents a day, $1 a day, those kind of things. That's kind of when we get into the sweatshops we talked about earlier in our immigration notes. Now, the other problem was that safety. You go to a job today, there's all these different safety things in place. For example, when I worked at a grocery store growing up in high school, I could not push the button on the trash compactor until I turned 18. So all these different rules and regulations are in place. If you look at back at this time, there are no guards on saws, no rails on walkways, poor quality, very, very easily to get hurt. Injury meant loss of your job because these workers needed people who could work. If you were injured, you lost a limb, lost a thumb, lost a finger, you could not do that job anymore. Top it off health-wise, there weren't a lot of health precautions. People didn't wear safety masks. They didn't wear safety suits. They didn't have shields over their faces or hair nets, those kind of things. You went to work in what you had on, and that was about it. The example of this is that 1/10 of steel workers at this time in history were killed on the job because they were hurt in some way, shape, or form. Many rail workers were injured. It was very easy when putting two railroad cars together to have the hitch go right through a person. And yeah, it killed them pretty much. In the slaughterhouses, it was easy to see who worked in the slaughterhouse because their hands were literally just a mess of cuts from the knives they used to butcher animals. So safety was definitely it. There was little to no safety measures put in place for workers at this time. Now, we come to the idea of unions here. And the question is, how do workers get the things they want? How do workers get the things they need? And a union is simply an organization of workers with a common goal. Okay? A lot of times you need to pay to be a member of the union and to receive the benefits. So the pay a lot of times goes to union officers and lawyers, supplies, stuff for you to help you out. That's kind of what the idea of the union is all about. And essentially, the union is supposed to fight for the workers or help negotiate for the union workers to get what they want. Maybe more paid, more benefits, shorter hours, more time off, better vacation, those kind of topics. So there are a lot of different types of union out there. And one type of union is a closed shop union. That means that all employees who are hired must be union members. So basically, you are a union member if you want to be a union member or not. The dues are taken right out of your check. You still get all the benefits of the union. On the flip side is open shop. So not all members are considered union if they choose to join. So it's not as maybe powerful as other unions, but you can get strength in numbers, okay? Example, like screenwriters, people who write movies and TV shows, musicians, like rock stars, that kind of stuff, are all unions. Now you can choose to be union or not choose to join. A lot of times there are a lot of benefits to joining because then you get help for help into the industry, you get help with legal issues, those kind of things, but you don't have to join. Now, in the late 19th century, there were a lot of dangers of becoming a union. employers did not like unionization. A lot of times, employers were worried that if workers started to unionize, they couldn't get away with other things that was going on. And so basically, a lot of them, the union gave employees the strength to ask for certain things, whether it be more pay, a slower pace, shorter hours, all those kind of things that kind of help workers find. And so a lot of times, unions were kind of a dangerous thing for employers at this time because they didn't want to see unions usually happen. So a lot of times, if a union got started, employers would just fire the union members right away. They would say no unions could take place. Or they would just basically, say fire anyone who was trying to organize a union. Now, sometimes, unions would start a strike. Probably a strike in a second. And a lot of times, employers are trying to stop strikes with protests somehow, with violence somehow. They may hire strike breakers. They may hire people to work for the strikers instead. They harass people. Sometimes the National Guard was brought in. So different times when workers try to organize, try to make changes, they were stopped. Some of the early writers that started, we're on a certain trade. So today we have, the Teamster Union. That's people who are involved in transportation, like shipping, that kind of stuff. You have a teacher union, a screenwriter union, steamfitter union, ironworker union, police and fire unions, usually around a certain trade. Well, the first early union was called the Knights of Labor. It was a tradesman union. Basically, if you were involved in any kind of job with your hands, you could belong to this union. They actually one of very open unions because they involved women and African Americans as well in the union. Kind of interesting for that time. One of the first people that one of his big leaders was a guy named Samuel Gompers. He was president of the American Federation of Labor, and it's kind of one of the big unions that start out. I mean, this union has 1.7 million members in it. Should be a little million down here, guys. Okay, by 1904, and Gompers basically helps to lead and inspire a lot of strikes across the country. Kind of this big overarching union group, and kind of say, kind of help little groups around the country try to get what they're looking for. A lot of union methods have a lot of different methods to try and get what they want. They can try to do negotiation. So negotiation means you go and you talk with your employer and say, listen, the workers want to have this. Can you try to figure something out? Okay? That doesn't work. Maybe try arbitration. So you have a third party. This is more used today, more than anything, more than it was back then, but they might go to somebody and say, okay, can we try and work this deal out with another person to make our demands met, whether it be more pay, less hours, whatever it is. The biggest method they had back then was the idea of the strike. And strikes are very important here, okay? Based on a strike, the workers refuse to work until they get what they want. And that's basically the idea of a strike, okay? You will go outside, picket, refuse to work. Honestly, it hurts the business a lot more than it hurts the employee because the managers, the owners, they can't run the machines. They don't know how to do this kind of stuff. And so, the owners are making no money while workers are striking. You usually see them outside, they'd be picketing, they'd be protesting, holding signs, a very, very public ordeal like you see in the bottom picture down here and the top picture up here. Now, there are a couple of a lot of responses, there are ways to respond to unions back then. One way is called a lockout. And basically, when people went on strike, the company just wouldn't let people back in at all. They said, your jobs are done. And they just wouldn't allow they would not allow union employees back to work. After the strike ended, they only hired non-union employees. That was one way around it, okay? The other way is hiring strike breakers, usually immigrants or somebody who was willing to work to go and take the jobs instead. Strike breakers are called scabs. The football strike back in 1987 in the NFL, they had scab players, where they were basically college players who were maybe not good enough to be drafted the first time, then went and played a few NFL games. And so that'd be an example of being a strike breaker that way. Sometimes they hired private security. They hired different groups, including groups like the Pinkerton Detectives, who work at a public detective agency. You give them guns and say, okay, you're going to protect the business, and if the strikers get out of hand, start shooting. They add deputies to the local sheriff's department. Basically say, we're going to protect the business, make sure nothing happens. Now, there's also called a yellow dog contract. It was basically a contract that employers would make you sign, stating that you will never, ever, 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 ever join a union, and you'll never, ever, 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 ever strike. And if you fire you, if you ever violate that contract. The thing about it, it's really fair or not? Not really, but we'll talk about it later on too. All right, so one of the first big strikes that happened is called the Strike of 1877, the railroad strike. Now remember, after the Civil War, all these railroads are being built all over the country. And so as railroads get more and more, they start losing a little money because they're building more and more, not making as much money as they were right after the war. Well, the B&O Railroad, also known as the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, actually cut wages for their workers twice in 1 year, okay, because they had built so much railroad and couldn't make money off it anymore. They kind of overbuilt, extended themselves too far, too much debt, couldn't make their wages. So they decided to cut the wages of the workers twice in 1 year. The workers, the union, decided to strike. They refused to work, build more track, make the trains go until the pay cut is canceled. It's actually so bad in West Virginia that they called in the state militia, basically National Guard, to stop the strikers and make them go back to work. The strikers refused. Eventually, it kind of like got just very, very tense to where there's actually a violent outburst in West Virginia. Strikers started throwing rocks, like you see down here at the soldiers, and as the way back, soldiers started shooting and stabbing with their bayonets the way through the crowd. This picked up the strikers. They set fire to railroad buildings in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and essentially the railroads didn't move for a while in that area until the strike was settled. Haymarket Square was another time. It was a peaceful strike at the McCormick Harvester Company, later became International Harvester, okay, in Chicago. And basically the workers there wanted to have an 8-hour day. And so they're striking outside the building, having a peaceful strike, and they're surrounded by 400 police officers just there to make sure that, you know, keep the peace. If the other workers are going to work, they're not going to be harassed, those kind of things. All of a sudden, somebody throws a bomb of some sort in the crowd. And the police start shooting in the crowd. And remember, you're surrounded, so you're shooting across the crowd here. And police get shot, people get shot because of this Haymarket Square issue. And so it becomes one of the big violent events that take place in terms of the strikes. Eventually, the strike ends peacefully. By far the most famous strike of this time period is the Homestead Strike in Pittsburgh in 1892. It was a steel mill owned by Carnegie. Okay, and Carnegie had hired a guy named Henry Clay Frick to run his mill. He was this guy who was a hard-nosed, had to do it my way or the highway kind of guy. And basically, when the union was negotiating with Frick, he locked them out and said, "We're not going to argue about a wage at all. You're done. We're going to pay what I'm going to pay you, and that's all that's going to happen." The union did a strike to get back at Frick. While Homestead plant, largest steel mill in the country, led by Frick, owned by Carnegie, decided to hire the Pinkerton Detective Agency. They were basically private soldiers to protect the factory. So you have guys out there with guns and protect the factory. All of a sudden, you have a shot ring out from somewhere, and the two sides start shooting at each other. You have the Pinkertons with rifles just laying down fire against people, and you have a few pistols on the other side shooting back. Eventually, the governor of Pennsylvania has to send in the National Guard, the militia, to stop the violence on both sides, both from the Pinkertons and from the strikers. Eventually, this strike goes, but it's one of the more violent issues in the strikes that happen. We'll talk about this more in class as well. Another big famous one was called the Pullman Strike, or the railroad strike. George Pullman, who owned these big company towns to make his cars, his railroad cars. Now what happened is that he owned both the factories and the living spaces in town. He cut his wages, but he didn't lower rents. All of a sudden now all his workers can't make their rents. Well, Eugene V. Debs was the guy who was the railroad union president, and the two unions basically got together. The railroad union said they would not run a railroad, they would not pull any cars made by Pullman until they fixed the railroad strike. Well, railroads started hiring non-union workers, and especially a lot of those were African Americans. They came up north, they crossed picket lines to secure jobs with the railroads. All of a sudden, violence breaks out all throughout Chicago, where you have fights between both races and union employees, and essentially, railroads don't move across the country for a while this strike's going on. Eugene V. Debs is jailed as a way for starting the strike, and it's one of those huge issues where the strike basically stops the country for a while because all the railroad traffic stops because nobody's working anymore. Even women got in the thing and started organizing as well. Some unions would not accept women, so they decided to make their own unions, mostly going off of wages, pay, safety, those kind of things. And we'll talk about this a little in our next unit, but one of the events that really kind of bring this out is the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire, where a lot of these companies would lock the doors on their factories. So this is a factory in New York, and it was a 9th floor factory, and they actually locked the doors to keep the workers in the factory so they wouldn't, leave early or sneak out, that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, a fire happened with machinery in the factory, a lot of women died in the fire, and you start seeing how it caused a lot of problems, and a lot of women start organized that way. So that's here's a review of what we did real quick. We'll talk about this more in class on Wednesday.